Okay. Okay. So, yeah, welcome everybody. This is Pathwork Guide Lecture number 43 lecture study, just running through the lectures and having a little discussion. This lecture was originally transmitted, it's one of the earlier ones, January 2nd, 1959. And it's entitled 3 Basic Personality Types: Reason, Will, and Emotion. So, greetings in the name of the Lord. I bring you blessings, my dear friends. My dear ones, we see with great joy that many of you are progressing very well on the road you have chosen, and that a few more have entered the path of liberation. Each soul who makes such a vital decision creates rejoicing in the spirit world. Rejoicing you too must feel sooner or later in your own heart, be it only after the first few obstacles and resistances have been overcome. You can be sure that your final decision to walk on this path of self-development, as well as each victory on this path, creates a special blessing for you. Whether or not you can feel it at the moment, this blessing is a reality. So, I just felt like that was a kind of a beautiful opening and blessing. Does anybody want to comment whether you're new or, been on this path? Does that make sense? Can you connect to what the guide might be offering there?
I like the part about our efforts, our human form efforts bring rejoicing to the spirits.
Yeah.
That's nice. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a way in which, it is this feeling of, working with and cooperating and being a part of something, really in this kind of mission, like where the guide talks about the plan of salvation, right? And that in a way, this is a participation in that, as we study and read and work with these lectures and embody this path as best we can.
Yeah. And also that, it's like the fulfillment of your incarnation, because maybe so many incarnations go unfulfilled.
That's what he says.
It's like, yeah, I mean, I could see the angels rejoicing. Oh boy, another one got the message.
Right. And I suspect that there's like different, like I think it's like maybe even from the spirit world, we take on so many possibilities that maybe in any given lifetime, we never completely fulfill it, right? But there is a very specific thing that you're naming there that he talks about, when you kind of take on consciously to embark on the path and to, like sort of consciously try to cooperate in this mission, then there's a shift in it. But I think, I don't know, that's my sense anyway, is that, like there's always more of our higher self that could be embodied and incarnated in any given lifetime, and so if we get all of our mission done, maybe, that was planned even, there's always more that we could take on.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. For sure.
So, but it is like, like what he's talking about is that celebration when, we really have made this vital decision, he says, right, to enter this path of liberation. And so many of my friends have prayed for help and strength on this path, but most of you do not recognize when your prayer is answered. I love this part, right? The prayer is often answered in a form that seems unpleasant to you. A conflict or a friction or something that induces you to feel unjustly treated. you do not realize that the very event that causes you temporary pain is an answer to your own prayer. The prayer in which you ask for help to recognize yourself and your conflicts so that you can purify yourself. How can you recognize your inner conflict unless it manifests outwardly? Only then can you become aware of the hidden part in you that deviates from divine law. Because the deviation is negative, it must materialize as something you feel in a disharmonious way. So I beg of you, my dear friends, consider the outer conflicts that come to you as answers to your prayer. Turn in the other direction. Instead of becoming defiant and hurt, turn inside, turn around, no matter how wrong you think others may be. Ask yourself, ask God, isn't there some grain of truth somewhere in this painful conflict? By recognizing it, I will continue to learn and develop. A wealth of further recognition must come to you that will cancel out all the disharmony, all the feeling of injustice or sadness, defiance or misery. Just turn your attention to your own inner reactions, my friends, when you feel unjustly treated or hurt, and you will see that your very own prayer was answered. And when you see your inner error, all the friction between you and your brothers and sisters will disappear like snow in the sun, and you will be able to unite with understanding and love. So, we just finished in our helpers group reading, the real and false needs, and it also has a lot of sort of, really trying to understand, that, when we're, that really the only way that we can, work the path, sort of the single discipline in this path, is to take this 100% responsibility stance, but not from this way of feeling, oh, we're bad or we're to blame, or, but to see that everything that comes to us is really an answer to our prayer. So it's a difficult discipline, spiritual discipline.
Yeah, because it's so easy to take the victim stance, the victimhood stance.
Right.
Yeah.
And more somehow emotionally rewarding, at least temporarily. But that's the thing that, I think you begin to see as like the cost in your life force if you take the victim stance. It's an eroding kind of energy. So, and it may have some temporary gain or, way of, making you feel better, not. And part of that is because we blame ourselves so much, so it's like the whole problem with blame and judgment, it's like one of my hymns says, like in the darkness comes into the light so we can face and feel it. Let's not get caught in judgment. There really is no need. Right.
Yeah, sorry, I'd like to add something here.
Go
I think
ahead.
it's a revelation probably had this week, because when I'm upset and I potentially know that it could be results of my action, even though I didn't intend it that way, I tend to blame, but I don't overtly blame. In my head, I'm like, oh, because of that, because of this. And I noticed my mom's dialogue is like that. So I don't even know that I'm doing it.
Yes, good awareness, because it's very, like we're plugged into the matrix, and it's an old habit, and it's an old, automatic thing. Yeah.
I've noticed that that's just how the dialogue goes in my head.
Right. But can you also notice, like, so each of those thoughts actually makes you feel something in your body?
I'm trying to be more attuned to that. Anytime I'm upset, I know I can't control it, but I just notice, okay, it's here and it's here. And this is what it's doing. Great.
And here there's a specific thing, we were speaking of is the judgment, right? And judgment has, like whether we're judging somebody else or ourselves, it has a feeling that maybe feels okay, like better as a defensive feeling, but it really doesn't feel like a positive life force thing, right?
No, and it's so hard to know, or for me anyways, when I'm being judgmental, because I think because I'm so judgmental towards myself, it's easier to project it outwards. And that's
Exactly.
that's what I've learned. Even with this victimhood, I think, guess we're lucky to know, because I truly believe that some people don't even realize that's what they're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying. It's like, we're not going to get there all at once, but just even taking that first step and beginning to recognize and becoming more conscious, right? And for a long time, yeah, it's like we're deep asleep, right? So we're trying to wake up, and it a lot of times, we wake up and we go back to sleep again, or we have a realization, but when we get triggered, it can't be easily applied. So it's just a matter of a kind of learning curve that happens over a whole lifetime, is my sense, right? And it's interesting because many of the things that I as a younger person, I used to get caught in, I don't so much anymore, right? So there is change is possible, but back, I can recognize what you're saying, back in the day, like there were so many times I would realize that I just couldn't, and for me, it was mostly judging myself. And now I'm noticing all of my judgment of everybody else. So I guess I'm progressing. But in some way, there's uh, a deeper realization, and trying to understand how we can trust, right? That even though nothing's perfect, right? And everything is an admixture and everything, but kind of it's like trusting ourselves to meet what is, and looking for all of our needs to be met, like from inside of ourselves. So when we want to be understood and seen, to make sure that we understand and see ourselves first, and if we're not doing that, it's like, it's not that, we don't still want somebody else, but it's not what you won't ever be able to take it in. You have to see and acknowledge and understand yourself. And then when others, also do, it can feel correct. Or if it's not, if they're seeing you incorrectly, it doesn't bother you, so much. It's just, you say something, but it's not a defense, right? Because it's because you know who you are, and people have their own opinions. People see things. We can't always force everybody to see things the way we see things.
And that's such a hard concept, because I've been taught otherwise. Like only now, I'm like, oh,
That's the ego, right?
yeah.
The ego wants, everybody to get on its, yeah. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about a huge transformation here, and in some ways, if you really look at what the guide is saying, it's like sort of evolving from a kind of limited egoic consciousness into the connection with our true Christ nature that's already inside of us, but we don't know it, right? And so in some way you could even think about it like, how a caterpillar into a butterfly, right? It's a very, I think ultimately vast transformation that we're in the midst of. And so on the other side of things, it will, outside of an egoic consciousness, is kind of like outside of a caterpillar consciousness, and into the butterfly consciousness. And you can, just imagine that the butterfly is much lighter and much, more full of joy and tenderness. And I don't know, there's just this kind of imagery there. I don't know if it works for you or not, but we're having to be patient and just, begin and keep looking, keep working. And it's just a lifelong kind of, again, a spiritual path, right? It's just something that it's always your guide, or it's always, that you're always working it. So there's not like, oh, somehow I gotta get to the end or get finished or get rid of all of these bad things so I can become good enough for God to love me, right? It's not about that. You know, it's like you're already completely loved. And then, you know, just as we are, we're just becoming more. And even where, you know, we're lost in our separated consciousness, there's a way that, you know, is also part of the journey, part of our process of individuation, part of, you know, like consciously waking up out of, you know, a womb, like, you know, oceanic state, you know, and into like this capacity to have a self and an action and a uniqueness, you know, of qualities and everything. And there's a great joy, like the guide says, you know, like on the spirit realm, you know, for the human beings that are down here doing this work, and also bringing forth their creativity and their love, right? So I guess I don't know how I got off on all that, but so I beg of you, my dear friends, consider the outer conflicts that come to you as answers to your prayer. So we read that, right? Ask yourself, ask God, is there some grain of truth somewhere in this painful conflict? By recognizing it, I will continue to learn and develop. A wealth of further recognition must come to you that will cancel out all the disharmony, all the feeling of injustice, sadness, defiance, or misery. So I don't know how I got myself lost again. When you see your inner error, all the friction between you and your brothers and sisters will disappear like snow in the sun. Okay, here we are. We in the spirit world pray for this understanding and love to be given to you, our brothers and sisters in the body, who are courageous enough to do the one thing that matters, turning inside to recognize and purify yourselves. There is no other reason for life on earth than to follow the road you have chosen. The more wholeheartedly you go about it, the more sincerely you prove your goodwill, the more you will realize that you have not lived your life in vain. It is never too late to begin. And I found that to be true as well, right? You know, like there's a kind of ultimate purpose. I remember a long time ago in the 60s, I think I came across a book called The Master Game of Life. You know, what's the most important thing in life? What's the master game? There's all kinds of games we can play. And I think in this way, you know, like this process of growing, this process of purifying is the master game of life. And it does, you know, it gives you this, you know, sense of, you know, having lived as fully as we can, right? And that's, I think, probably the most valuable gift we can give ourselves in the long run, you know, because, you know, on our deathbed or looking behind, you know, like if, you know, and well, everybody has regrets or something, you know, but I mean, like, you know, this idea that, you know, you may not have done it perfectly, but you gave it your best, right?
It's a big sentence. There is no other reason for life on earth than to follow the road you have chosen. You have chosen. You already chosen this road, so why would you come here and not follow it? You know?
Exactly. And yet we do. I mean, you know, to varying degrees, you know, we all do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We get distracted. Or we never wake up.
Right. And the more wholeheartedly, you know, then we can long for it or desire it or activate it, you know, or pursue it, or, you know, be willing to recognize our own faults and imperfections without, again, crucifying ourselves or self-judgment, right? You know, but for the purpose of growing and correcting and loving more, right? So we have to see, but if we see with discernment rather than judgment, then we don't have to feel bad about what we're seeing. We don't have to attack it, you know, and then, you know, get lost in it, right? Like all of these things that we usually do just, you know, trap us in unproductivity with it. And so this is where, you know, it's to me, the trick is to, you know, and it took a long time for me as well, because I was so judgmental of myself. And so, one of the things we create is this superimposed conscience, that always says how we should be.
We're not too gentle with it, are we?
Yeah. I mean,
We
it's
learn how to be gentle with the journey.
Yeah.
As well as ourselves. Otherwise, you can get very discouraged and beat yourself up. Well, I thought I was on the path, but now I'm. I drank a bottle of wine tonight, and I don't feel too much on the path right now. Or whatever. Whatever.
Yeah, and exactly, and it's kind of like, that's the thing, is the guide is saying, we have to be where we are. So if that's what we did, then that's just where we are on the path, right? And we have to move from there to our next step, right? We can't jump over a step, or we can't deny a step, to me, it's kind of like there's a way that we have to embody in every cell and every aspect, every particle of our being, more light. And every part of our dense matter body and our energy, body, with our emotions and thoughts and traumas, like they're filled with a lot of other things, right? And so in a way, we're trying to bring the light body into our physical body. And in order to do that, as the light body comes in, it's got to clear out and make room for it, right? So this penetration of the light into matter is, like bringing up and out of us the errors, or the, consciousness that sees the errors, and, but also like where we have to, again, like the guide says, what you're praying for is what's happening. So, even when I pray, for my, for trying to purify my faults, help me not interrupt so much or something, like, then the fact that I probably will still interrupt, right? It's not that God isn't helping me, it's that God is saying, okay, pay attention and notice what's going on here, right? And let yourself get more conscious of why you need to interrupt so much, and then take care of that part of you, or see, maybe it's just coming from an old trauma, or the way it was in your family, that and maybe it's from anxiousness, or fear, like something that you won't get your words out, or something like that. So there's lots of reasons, and if we can understand ourselves, right, then we can also support and transform that from a very gentle, loving place, rather than beating it to death or trying to get rid of it, right? It doesn't ever work that way. So it says, many of you are filled with a sincere desire to not unite with God. But before you can do so, you must find the many little opportunities to unite with your fellow human beings, to practice humility and love, leaving out your pride and ego, and proving that what you mean is serious. For only here and now, right where you stand, can you find God. So that's also a very beautiful little, tidbit here. See what it might bring up in you, like. I know that one of the hardest things that we have, I mean, it's like we can be good as long as we're not kind of rubbing off of our little projectiles, our porcupineness, around our brothers and sisters. And then also, like all of those other human beings that, we're finding difficulty, being with, or in conflict with, and everything, I was working with, my anger, towards the current situation in the world, in our government, and with the Supreme Court and stuff. And I mean, it's true, that's there's a discernment that I would say, but I also notice that what I have is hatred and vengeance in my heart, right? In some part of me that really, and that's my trauma, that's my PTSD. And then I guess, their hatred and vengeance somehow must be their own PTSD, because that's what they're expressing as well, right? So somehow, I don't know what the answer is, but I think all of this, ego and pride and judgment that we carry, is this, we're lost and away from God in some sense, and we're scared and we're traumatized and we're trying to fight for something that we think is important somehow. So that's the kind of introduction to this lecture, but it was a very like interesting little
Charlie,
go ahead,
sorry,
Jasmine.
can you scroll up a little?
Mhm.
And can you explain that line where it says, sorry, you just lost it. Oh yeah, proving that what you mean is serious. What does that mean exactly?
I'm trying to see where you are. Let's see.
No, go down. It's the second last line.
So it's in the yellow?
Yeah. It's to practice humility, love, leaving out your pride and ego, and proving that what you mean is serious.
Oh, okay. Okay. I don't know why I couldn't see that. Yeah. So, I mean, he's just saying in a way that we have to do the work, right? Our natural tendency, would be, to react with pride and justify it, right? So if we're, willing to really, like take on and understand that part of our job here is to learn to love each other, to unite with our fellow human beings, we have to learn how to get along, how to accept each other, all of that. And so we're gonna not want to naturally, right? So it's not like we have to do that perfectly, you won't, right? But again, when you don't, like if you can at least take it on yourself to examine it and notice it and recognize it, and then ask for help with it, right? And then the more, of course, that we can learn to engrave our heart with that state, and we can approach life from a place of humility and love, sort of naturally, not again superimposing it, not trying to, do it in a masky way, but really feeling the truth of it, having evolved to that level, right? Does that help? I'm sure I answered it.
But I also think that what he's saying there too is that prove to your friends and the people you interact with that what you mean is serious.
Mm-hmm.
Don't bring your pride and ego to the equation. Prove that what you mean to be is serious.
So
Exactly.
would that include things like not being passive aggressive, not saying exactly how you feel, or falling into the trap of peer pressure?
Yeah, I mean, those can be those are both, things that could be recognized as, parts that you're working on and purifying. And if you're working on it, it's not like you have to do it perfectly, because you can't, but if you're aware of it and saying, okay, I see, I do that. And you make it's like an inner intention, an inner choice in your heart, and says, God, help me. I don't want to do that anymore, because I see it's not, the highest, or it's not, really what I choose. Then, there's a way that Spirit can help, and you can continue to evolve and make your efforts met by God's efforts and Spirit's efforts, and you will arrive there, right? So if you kind of just are boasting or speaking about, oh, I'm on a spiritual path, but you're not living it, like, I mean, some people you can think of these days, maybe, like, like for instance, like I always wonder, like, how Christians justify their stance on the border, because it's like, it really doesn't feel very ultimately what Jesus taught, right? And so, you can say that you're a good person and a good Christian, but, if you're not really looking at your faults or trying to improve your, self and, reduce your ego and your pride and learn how to love more, then I don't think that, and a lot of people can say it and they don't mean it, but the proof is in the pudding, in the work. It sounds like you feel like some of those things you're doing. And so tell me, like, are you afraid that, like, how does that land in you then? Like that means if that's the case, I'm bad because I'm doing these, or I'm stuck because I'll never get out of them, or other people are doing them to me. I don't know what it make the connection.
That's a good question. I guess I'm trying to see if I'm being, I guess if I'm not putting on a mask and being true to, I suppose my actions, just that, right? Because actually in the morning today, I read somewhere, it was a very similar message to what you just read now. So it was interesting, like, what virtue am I acting from? Like, am I doing something because I want something? Am I doing something because I don't want to upset somebody? Or is this my authentic self? I don't know what that means, but like you said, we're working on it. We're on our way to it. So I think that's how this lands on me right now.
Great. Yeah, no, I think that's good. And it, exactly, like, and we don't know our authentic self right away because we've lived out of these other places, right? And so it's like at first it's just recognizing, oh, that's maybe, not that authentic self, or maybe that's, I'm doing it, to get what I need, or, to, kind of influence, there's, like you said, passive aggressive, or there's manipulative, or there's, even love, the guide talks about it. I mean, basically what you're talking about is, the masks of the divine qualities. So the guide says that, uh, love, power, and serenity are these three divine qualities. And when they're in functioning together, like they're a really beautiful, combination. But the child takes one of those and kind of isolates it out and tries to make it into a mask, right? Of how it should be. If only I'm perfectly loving, then everybody will love me back. So love becomes submission, right? Instead of true love. Now you're loving in order to get, and it's probably you're just acting loving. You're not even really loving, right? In order to,
or not saying, well, for me, this particular situation, it was not saying something because I wanted to keep the other person happy.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I mean, sometimes it's a tough call, right? Like, especially if it's, like there's no point in hurting them, in some way. But if you're, I don't know, like it's a study, right? And just avoiding making them unhappy, maybe doing you and them a disservice.
Yeah, and so the fine medium between that was conveying my message in a very compassionate and loving way, because I realized that's how I want to act. So that's
Beautiful.
how it ties together. So I said what I wanted to say, but not blaming. It was more of,
Yeah, there you go. Excellent. How did it work?
I think it went well. I think it did.
Good. Yeah, I mean, it's usually pretty obvious, because usually if we do it the other way, we get a big reaction from people, and it's not what we wanted at all. So
Yeah,
so it sounds like you.
It was kind of funny too, not funny, but I wrote an email, and one of them, I could physically feel the energy, which I was like, oh, this seems like there's daggers coming out of it. And the other one felt light and airy. It was the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Great. Excellent. That's it. So now he's going into, we ready to go into the 3 basic types of personality?
Yes.
So he says the first type governs his or her life and reactions mainly with reason. The second type does so mainly with emotion, and the third type does so with the will. So these are our kind of like three aspects or capacities that we have: reason, will, and emotion. And then sometimes, like one of those is usually dominant in the way that we operate. And so in your self-search, it will be useful for you to find out which type you are. A personality is never completely one-sided. Every person is a mixture of types, but one is always predominant. In some cases, the predominance is obvious. In others, the mixture is more complicated, and therefore the predominant type is more difficult to detect. In the ideal personality, each of the three aspects has a rightful place. The harmonious person functions with each aspect in a perfect way. Since there is no completely purified human being, however, the three trends are often directed into wrong channels, aside from imbalance or predominance. For instance, where reason should prevail, emotions do, or vice versa. When in your inner work, you penetrate your soul, your images, your wrong conclusions, the layers of your errors, and whatever you may encounter. This approach will give you added understanding about who you are and what you are, how you are in reality. Let us begin with the reason type. The personality governed predominantly by reason. Those who conduct their lives mainly by the reasoning process are apt to neglect the emotions. They are afraid of emotions. They thwart and cripple them, and in doing so, they cripple one of the most important instruments in life, namely the intuition. Those who are afraid of emotion cannot trust their intuition, because intuition is blurred by their fear of it, by their distrust of its supposed intangibility. The reason type often secretly looks down on the emotion type. He or she is proud to be so steeped in the reasoning process. And the will, which is not necessarily self-will, is in this type used mainly to follow deductions made with the reasoning process, seldom paying attention to the emotions or intuitions, which should also be heeded. Such a person of reason is often an intellectual, perhaps a scientist. He or she is often an agnostic or even an atheist who tends to be materialistic. However, it would be a gross generalization to state that all or even most reason types are spiritually less developed or aware than, for instance, emotion types. This is not so. There are many highly developed and spiritually awakened reason types, just as there are awakened emotion types. They differ only in the approach. The reason type finds it more difficult to experience the divine within. The emotion type encounters other difficulties. Furthermore, the reason type has great difficulty with intuitive judgment of others and of the self. The will, which is a necessity in life for all, is used one-sidedly by both types. The reason type uses will premeditatively, often overcautiously, whereas the emotion type is carried away by emotions and uses willpower unconsciously and erratically. And often, sometimes their emotions are used to, get their way, right? So it's will-backed feeling. So the harmonious personality finds the middle way and uses the will rationally or emotionally, depending on the situation. The will should be a servant both to reason and emotion. It will be easy for you to see that the reason type goes through life missing a great deal of experience, mostly out of fear and pride. This type fears that emotion might lead to an experience he or she will be unable to cope with. So like reason is sort of afraid of chaos or afraid of overwhelm, right? And these fears the guide is laying here, this is kind of like more than just your usual fear, right? You can understand this in this lecture. This is part of how the keys works with it, that these fears are really deaths, right? That we're so terrified of this, it's like a mini death to be in a state, for reason type to be, like, actually, I think it's rejected for the reason type. So, but anyway, like each of the types has a different death to face that they really, feel like they can't stand. And so, in this, reason type just emotion, and like I think somewhere, I don't know where they got that, but I swear, if I'm remembering correctly in the keys, that the reason type actually of the death is the emotional, it's a feeling of emotional rejection or something like that. But anyway, that's not what it's saying here. So let's see if we can find it in the lecture. I looked when I was reading it before and I didn't see it either. So I'm not sure. I'll have to see if I can find out where they got that information. But emotional life necessarily carries uncertainty and risk. And so the rational type tries to keep everything well ordered, knowing at all times where one stands and avoiding motions which leave one at sea. The emotion type is equally one-sided. Predominantly emotional people often pride themselves that only they are capable of truly feeling. They secretly look down on people they derogatorily label intellectuals. Yet the extreme of this type is not one iota less removed from harmony and divine law than is the extreme reason type. It is true that the emotion type tends to have a good intuition and is sometimes less afraid of feeling and inner experience than is the reason type. However, the emotion type, contrary to the reason type, who holds life's reins too tightly, often loses grip on life's reins altogether. The over-emotional person completely loses sight of the fact that reason is also God-given. And such people are just as arrogant as the reason type who looks down on the emotion type. They are often so carried away by uncontrolled feelings that they do not only lose control over themselves, but become blind to that which is often most important for their lives and development. Due to their overemphasis on the emotional side, they neglect the equally important reasoning functions of thinking, discriminating, selecting, and weighing. They must learn to use the intellect to curb the wild emotions that, without necessarily being impure, flow without purpose or direction. Only then can they use the will properly. So let me pause there a minute and see. There's a lot of material there. Anybody have a question or want to comment?
I'm not completely buying the looking down part. I think there could be some envy in there on both sides. I think the reason type could be envious of an emotional,
Oh, I
an
see what you're
emotional
saying.
type can be envious of a reasoning type, not so much a looking down kind of thing.
Yeah,
Maybe,
I mean,
I could see where an overly emotional person would be like sandpaper on the personality of a reason type. But I
yeah,
don't see any need to have a looking down kind of attitude.
I think what you're saying has, I think it's a both and. I mean, I can recognize I know even when I was first in the Pathwork, right, it was all about emotion. And so every time I got into my intellectual discussion, I always felt guilty, like I was not being a good pathworker because I was, being too intellectual, right? And too so I think there was some looking down in that way. I do think that maybe I can see in myself now, as I've accepted my emotion type, and I have, we're all a combination, but, that there is a way in which, for me, when the reason type gets into wanting to do a lot of, abstract kind of superimposed organization and, structure around something, then I have a negative reaction, and I kind of judge it as being, like they're not in the spiritual flow of things, right?
Right.
They want to impose. So, but all of that is, yeah, anytime we're judging in some sense, we're like what we talked about earlier, we're off base. And you're certainly right. I think about, that people can envy the other part, for sure. And, so I think it's kind of all of the above.
I mean, if you were a reasoning type and you went to a concert, let's say, for instance, and an emotion type musical performer was performing, you would be moved. There's no way you couldn't be moved. You wouldn't sit there and say, oh, I gotta leave. This is too much, emotion. You would enjoy the music and you might say to yourself, wow, I wish I could do that.
Sure. I mean, I certainly, I think that's certainly one of the possibilities. I can also see though, like what he's saying is like the reason type, may not be enough in their sensory to really have much a connection to music. And most of us do to some degree, but there are people that are completely, and so, they might not even go to the concert, much less, like, and maybe if they were sitting next to somebody else comparatively, that they would not receive as much of an emotional, hit that somebody was more open. But yeah, it's like, I think it's like there's so many ranges of all of this stuff. And that's the thing, is it's never like there aren't these one ways. They're kind of guidelines to explore who you are, maybe look at other people and see, understand what's happening. But yeah, I think, I agree, if the guide's not saying if that's the only, response, but I think, oftentimes we have some.
I think we tend to avoid what
Right.
feels like
the
sandpaper
masks.
on our personality, except when those people are actually in our family or in our workplace.
Right,
We
exactly.
can't avoid them. Then that's when it becomes an issue.
And what this reminds me of too, and it's kind of similar, like, so in the, love, power, and serenity masks, right? I don't know if you remember doing core classes with, but the power mask has contempt for the love mask and the serenity mask, and the love mask has contempt for the power mask and the, serenity mask, and then the serenity mask has contempt for both of the others, so it's like there is this kind of, way that we pride ourselves in what we are and look down usually on the other. And I think in reason, will, and emotion, it's kind of close, like emotion and love mask kind of go together. Now they don't have to, they can be, there's the, the power and the will, right? And then the reason and the serenity are somehow connected in some ways. So
that was me, reason and serenity.
Yeah.
I was
until you're not, right?
Until I'm not. So I'm like, you know what? I can't take any more of you. I'm either gonna let you know or I'm gonna leave. One or the other.
Yeah. So yeah. So and then he's saying, like uncontrolled, like you said, like the reason type, is gonna, not be comfortable around uncontrolled emotions, bringing havoc into the extreme. So they won't probably hang out with those types of people very much. As so
that can be exhausting for somebody who's a reason. Hanging out with somebody who's emotional about everything and just irrational to, it seems like an irrationality to a reason type.
Right. And so that's
totally
where exactly that's where the judgment comes. This is just irrational, right? So yeah. So the temptation to give in to the emotions is at first manageable, he's saying, but if you keep giving in, then it becomes more difficult to resist temptation. I think that may have been what what I did. I'm still working on it. And until one is simply carried away by the torrent of uncontrolled emotions which destroy everything in their wake. Now, one of the things that, I discovered in all of this is that a part of that is how much you are identifying with the story, which is the part of the reasoning part, right? So like if you have your experience and you tell a story about why it's this way and you make yourself a big victim and, how awful it is, you're going to build yourself up into a torrent of uncontrolled emotions and then overreact, right? And so to the extent that we can sort of recognize our dramas, right? And kind of question them. And we may, not be able to sort it all out right away, but, to just realize, okay, so, this is more drama, and feeling than maybe the circumstance really warrants, right? And oftentimes it is connecting us back to trauma. It's the old trauma stuff that triggers us to that degree. and it's not that the trauma, the real trauma, is actually happening again. It's not, nothing dangerous is happening, but somehow whatever it is reminds us enough that we've, reacted now from that story, and now we're going to bring that story to pass, right? We'll actually create it. But as we can begin to recognize, like our feelings, and recognize that sort of when we're really carried away in our feelings, that's something else. That's our natural feelings are very easy to just sit with and be with and to open to and to feel and to let go through us. So, when we're in a torrent of uncontrolled emotions, usually there is a life or death story, belief, thing that's going on inside, and some old trauma stuff that's surfacing. And it's interesting, because the guide, it was before they had all this knowledge about trauma and stuff, and I think he does mention it, but like this is also where, the guide is saying, okay, so such a person cannot help being selfish and destructive, although this kind of selfishness is different from the selfishness of the reason personality type. The emotion type person needs first to realize that what he or she has been so proud of has ceased to be an asset because of its extreme manifestation. This type must cultivate the faculty of selecting, deliberately thinking, and planning. This selection process is the beginning of wisdom. The emotion type also uses will, of course, for no one can exist without doing so. But the emotion type uses will chaotically and impulsively, without planning or deliberation. Submerged in unchanneled instincts rather than constructive intuition, such a person loses balance in life, just as a reason type does in the opposite way. This is interesting. I'm just, like, as I'm reading this now, I'm recognizing a piece for me that, like, I think, what the guide is saying is that, we should use our will, like for the purposes of planning and deliberately constructing and that kind of thing. But I think, for me, in a way, the more I tried to, use my will to sort of manifest something and plan and make something happen and all of that, the more, the inevitable, sidetracks or upsets, or, that doesn't work out quite the way the planning went, the more that would get to me, and I would, be reacting or fuming or trying to use my will in an inappropriate channel, right? And so I sort of learned, to let go of all that planning, or maybe to plan loosely, right? And trust in the flow, right? Or accept what happens anyway, outside of the plan, because otherwise, it's like that place where the sense of, oh, I'm supposed to, make it happen this way, it's like you can't, and then you're either frustrated with yourself or other people, right? Rather than just kind of accepting and surrendering, the chaos of life or the unplanned things, or, and sometimes when you can really do that, you can open and see, oh, it was even, like a better thing, somehow than what the potential plan was. So I like to include, that kind of flexibility in the planning somehow, to stay healthy in my own will-backed emotional place. So both are, both being emotion and will type, are subconsciously afraid of their opposite extremes. Yeah. Therefore, they remain in their own extreme. And I would say that feels resonant in me. They thus act from a wrong conclusion, led by the wrong conclusion they feel or unconsciously think that their own extreme is a better solution to life than the opposite types. The reason type, afraid of losing control, cuts out not only a major part of life's necessary experience, but beauty and happiness as well. The emotion type fears that curbing and disciplining his or her nature will eliminate something valuable in life. Both are wrong. For only the harmonious middle path leads to the complete solution. Although there are obvious representatives of both types, there are many more who are not quite so clear-cut. A person may be over emotional or over intellectual in some aspects of their personality, yet more balanced or even tend to the opposite extreme in other aspects. Or the person's true nature may be masked. For example, a basically emotional person chooses, because of fear and immature currents, a mask of intellectuality that is foreign to his or her true nature. Such a person may appear outwardly very calm and controlled, but inside is caught in a storm of emotions, unable to find peace until starting to work toward achieving a proper balance. I think like in some ways in me, like there was a lot of emotionality. And so I used rationality to try to rationalize my emotional and justify myself and argue with my parents and all of that stuff, about how I was fine to be all of that emotional. So, it's interesting how all of these categories can kind of blend and merge in unique ways. So in the third category is the will type, who is altogether different. Will is supposed to be a servant, never a master. Ideally, the will should serve equally the reasoning process and the emotional and intuitive faculties. This will type makes a servant, it makes a master of the servant. This brings the personality out of focus in a way that can become dangerous. Like the other two types, such persons may unconsciously look down on both of the others. The will type thinks or feels something to the effect of the reason type is just an intellectual who talks well and has wonderful theories, but it is all in the abstract. Nothing is ever accomplished by that. Nothing is achieved. I am the achiever. The emotion type, who accomplishes even less, is even more despicable to the will type. The judgment is right in both cases, as the other two types are right in their judgments about the other extremes. But all the types are wrong in believing that their own extreme is better than those extremes they look down upon. The person of will for whom the servant is the master is out for achievement and tangible results. This focus tends to make such a person impatient and apt to forfeit the very results he or she seeks. It cripples the reasoning process, which joined with the emotional nature leads to wisdom. Without such wisdom, people either cannot accomplish what they set out to accomplish, or if they succeed, they cannot benefit from the accomplishment in the right way, and thus will lose it again. The will type tends to lose sight not only of caution, but also of many aspects and considerations of life that are essential in order to gain truth for the self, for others, as well as for any given situation. The person of will also neglects the emotional side, fearing emotion as much as the reason type does, but with a different purpose in mind, which is often unconscious. Emotions are acceptable to the will type only so long as he or she remains master of them. So this is where, a lot of times the will type can be very manipulative with their emotions. They're the actors, right? And so they can, fake tears or fake anger or, fake, like they're always kind of, in this role, and the role is in service, like the guide said, of accomplishing something, of getting their will met. So it's a control kind of thing. And it's like it is important to recognize sometimes, for people, the will type in business and in other dealings. I mean, everybody has their stuff, but these people can be kind of more psychopathic, right? In more of the I can't think of the word of it, but anyway. So like there's also, very advanced will types, right, as well. And they're very effective in government and in other places, of getting things done, right? But they do use power a lot. And so anyway, let me continue here. The will type, like the reason type, also misses an integral part of the life experience. Yeah, this is very key, of giving oneself up to a feeling without knowing the outcome and the possible advantage of doing so, right? And this is a kind of surrender and also a kind of intimacy, or a kind of, openness to life that the willpower won't ever allow, right, the will type. So within in the state of control of the feelings, one can never open up to the fullness of life in that way. Any comments in any of that? So you all know many
I
human.
would like to make
Go
a
ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Come on in, Frank.
I think that my path work, specifically the time that I spent in the TP program, it kind of balanced out my personality types. I think when I came, I was strong reason, but in the process of doing some process work and letting my emotions out, I began to understand the value of emotions,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so a balance came into effect there over time.
Yeah, beautiful.
So I didn't feel, I didn't feel so lopsided anymore. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel, and I can honestly say that now, at this stage in my life, I do feel like I have a nice balance between reason and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to work on my will, because
The
I
will
can
is,
be a willful being when stuff is not going my way,
uh-huh.
and people close to me are acting irrational, that's when my will
Gotcha.
seriously kick in.
Right, right. In service of the reason.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Good. How about you, Jasmine? You have a sense of you emotion, reason, or will type, or the balance in between?
I think I can go into extremes.
On all three?
Yeah, like not so much of, I forget the term, but not so much of, for example, like when I'm by myself, I'm like, it's gonna be this, it's gonna be this way, it's not gonna be any other way.
Okay.
Then I'm swayed easily.
So when you're saying it's going to be this way, is that will and reason, or just reason, or just will? Do you feel like you want it to be when you decide it's supposed to be a certain way?
I think it's reason.
Okay.
Yeah, like I try to, I try to be fair.
Okay.
Yeah, but there are times when things don't go my way. I'm just upset.
Okay.
Then I'm emotional.
Right. Good. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I'm not sure. I think I probably have to sort of read this again.
Yeah, no, and it takes a while to really see all of these, and still we always uncover more. So yeah, but that was good to see. And yeah, it's like every time I read these, I get a little more, I see a little deeper connection or something like that. So I've never gotten everything in a lecture at one time. So he says, you may remember the lecture I gave you about the active and passive forces, in which I said that both currents are necessary for the healthy human soul. And I think later on he uses the word receptive rather than passive, but it's like this another aspect of this balancing, right? And says what frequently happens is that the active current flows through the channel destined for the passive current, and vice versa. It is similar with reason, emotion, and will. Even when there is no outright predominance, emotion perhaps is used where reason should function, and vice versa. And the will does not function where it should, yet often functions where it should not. So basically that completes, his discussion on this. And there are, ways that people are working and building it out, and other lectures that, reflect back on this and stuff like that. But he goes into a Q&A place that some of them felt like they were kind of abstract. I did pick up on a couple of more of them. So you're good for looking at a couple of the Q&As?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah, I think this was where I found that
Yeah.
sentence about basically what he said was, in its purified state or its perfected state, reason becomes wisdom,
Yeah,
emotion becomes love, and
Yeah.
will becomes courage.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Very beautiful understanding there. And so he's responding to this question, does everyone have the same potential for the development of each of these qualities? And he says, no, there are basic types, that each divine spirit was created perfect in one way. And yet each was a distinct being, a personality in its own right with different talents and characteristics. But there was no disharmony in the distribution of currents. The highest angel of the active forces is not disharmonious in his activity, as an unpurified human being would be with an overactive current. He is just perfect in his own way, a specialist in his activity, which excludes the possibility of a disharmonious overemphasis. It is the same with the highest representatives of the three aspects I discussed tonight. The perfection of the reason personality would be the angel of wisdom. The perfection of the emotion personality would be the angel of love. And the perfection of the will personality would be the angel of courage. So, this was what came up in my head too. The next, wouldn't it be ideal to have all three in balance? Yeah. So the ideal form is in balance, but that does not mean that they are distributed in equal measure. And I thought this was interesting. Balance and harmony do not always mean an equal measure of each current. Balance depends on the ways the currents are distributed, on how the distribution works in cause and effect, on the way one current strengthens and another instead of weakening it, as happens in the disharmonious and unpurified being. But just let's back up for a minute and just kind of like tune in and see, like, what does it feel like? Can you imagine what, this perfection of, being, in your own heart, right? In your own being, like being the angel, of love, of wisdom, and of courage. Can you imagine that? Because that's basically saying that's really within us, our inner nature as well. I mean, we all are, like split off pieces of this ultimate perfection, and we all possess that, and we are purifying it, but somewhere within us, it's already purified, right? It's like there's God opposed layers that cover it up that we have to take off, but the core of us is that. And so we're developing it in some ways. On one level, you can think of it, but in other ways, we are also just excavating it, uncovering it, cleaning, like polishing a precious stone to reveal the inner light that can come through, and the beauty and the clarity. So then he says, if you reread the story of creation I told some time ago, you will see that God created each spirit perfect in its unique way. The idea was that these spirits would perfect themselves with the creative power that was given to them. In other words, they would perfect themselves in all ways instead of remaining perfect in one special way, and thus would become godlike. So this is kind of an interesting, I don't know exactly what to make of it or what to do with it. Sometimes these allegorical ideas, you can kind of see how they apply. And so, and I assume this does, I just haven't quite penetrated it. But, there's this interesting way to think about, like, so the divine beings, that God created initially, they were perfect in one aspect. But their mission was like to become whole in the way of perfecting themselves in other aspects as well, and incorporating other aspects into them. And then the more one, perfects in all ways, the more godlike, right? Instead, many spirits use their power in the wrong way, causing the fall. Had the fall not happened, all spirits would have become truly divine in every conceivable respect, instead of being specialists in one particular aspect. So now in the spirit world, the guide says, like both the dark spirits and the light spirits are kind of specialists, in these different, qualities. And so, he's saying that had the fall not occurred, all of these beings would have gone on to become, complete. And yet with the process of, and he says this process of perfect creation will continue after all the fallen spirits again reach their original perfection in one particular way until this plan of salvation is successfully accomplished. And until then, all pure spirits, those who did not participate in the fall, as well as those who have already reached their original state, pull their resources to help in the plan of salvation, postponing their own further creation to some extent. Although in an indirect way, they work toward that end by helping in the great plan.
That's deep.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful to think too, like of how much, the love in between the fallen souls and, like the whole thing, the whole plan of creation and the longing that the guide speaks of in those lectures, between the fallen spirits and those unfallen in the service, that they have given to, bring us back into the fold. And also like in the beginning of this lecture, what we were reading, like their great joy when we're awakening and shouldering some of the work with them and helping, because there's so much more that also we can do incarnate than they can do, right? So then there's this little discussion around the why courage is the perfection of will, and I kind of get it, and I don't know if I can add a lot, but we can explore it. Maybe some of you guys can. And I do feel like, I mean, one of the things in another, in the Daime, like they talk about courage and discourage, so like a lot of times the hymns say, keep me in my heart, don't let me get discouraged, right? And the heart is the place of love, but it's also the place of courage. And when we get discouraged, it's like we fall energetically, we fall again, and so there's this kind of holding courage, is different than we think of as just, courage in battle, or, courage in, the face of some extreme fear or something like that. It's the courage to live our everyday life. It's the courage to face what comes and to trust, and that we can face whatever comes, and the work to not run away from our feelings, not run away from our own self-creations, right? So the guide answers. Wait a minute, I skipped something.
Back up a little.
If you have courage, you need a great amount of will in a positive sense. Isn't that clear? Can you explain why you do not feel that courage and will go together? And the questioner says, well, I know a lot of people who have no willpower, but who are very courageous. And the guide says that has nothing to do with it. A person can be very emotional, but the emotions may be all covered up so that this person appears to be quite cold. A person who has no willpower and yet has courage may summon this courage partly from the recesses of the soul, where all perfect attributes slumber, partly in response to outside events to prove himself and others that he or she has willpower. So I didn't quite understand that response too well. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? I mean, to me, again, the summoning of courage, right? Like you can be very emotional, maybe, and so you're reacting quickly, and that may look like courage, or I don't know, like, but like you're really moving in fear to defend, right? So I mean, to me, courage is kind of holding calm in the heart, breathing, grounding, staying centered, right? And it's like also just, when life gives us, lemons and stuff, like the courage to say, okay, let's make lemonade, let's keep going. Let's do something with this as best we know how. And that's courage to me, to not give in to negativity, to despair, to, rejection of life in some way, when the going gets tough or whatever. So is there also a certain courage that comes from fear? Again, I'm surprised at the guide's answer a little bit. Definitely, a positive attribute can originate in either a positive or a negative motive or current. This is the complication of the human soul. In addition to its pure background, any quality may be motivated by negative tendencies. So I think that's kind of what I was saying earlier. The same applies to faults. But the natural and positive extension of will is courage. Natural and positive extension of will is courage. The will to be here, the will to bring yourself forth into life takes tremendous courage. So both will and courage are active. In will, there must be a strong active current. The will is often used negatively and self-destructively. That's something else again. And also the fact that inborn courage, which is based on willpower, cannot function because of other deviations in the personality. It does not negate the principle. We're not discussing the many possibilities of mixed up soul currents where the will may be broken and then appears only in certain aspects of life. Will needs active pressure, either positive or negative. It needs activity. In the purified state, the will would manifest as courage. It may even manifest as courage in the unpurified state, although then the courage is used for wrong purposes. Courage cannot exist without activity. Courage appears in a spirit of surging ahead, in a spirit of doing, rather than in a spirit of being, as would apply, for instance, to love. So, interesting. In finding and purifying oneself, can a predominantly intellectual individual release more of the two currents also? They must, because that is the purification process. Often the person whose willpower is crippled, yet who displays courage in some instances, may be similar to a person who seems to be more the intellectual type, but who is not really that at all. One who by nature is more emotional may fear emotion and thus assume a mask that does not correspond to his or her true nature. In the purification process, all these types must begin by finding and being true to their natures. Only then can they resolve the disharmony in their souls. In other cases, the apparent reason personality is really just that. The true reason type will learn balance so that reason will function properly in the self-search and purification, which ultimately will eliminate the phantoms of fear that have blocked harmonious functioning. So, this is referring to some book that I don't know about, but maybe in his response, he just refers back to Pathwork. So he says, the final aim is to find that which is divine in yourself. There is no doubt about it. But until you can get that far, you need help. Often communication with the spirit world of God is the best means to get the help. Complicated and perilous as the establishment of such communication is, once it is established, it is best suited to help you remove all that obstructs your divine spark. However, this is not the only way. Human teachers can also help you remove your inner obstructions. There have always been great teachers who have done just that. And then he also talks about the medicine for the soul, depth analysis, which was, sort of the main thing back in those days of self-exploration and self-discovery. Communication with the spirit world ultimately has only one purpose, no matter in what stage of development the medium is. Learning about the facts of creation, about God, and what happens in the universe and the various spheres of secondary, my friends. The sole purpose of telling you about such things is to help you understand the reason for life and the necessity of development, and to give you the incentive to overcome your resistance to taking the steps to reach your own divine spark. You should consider all teachings and all religions from that point of view. The knowledge of universal facts is a help and an incentive, but not the final aim. The final aim is self-finding and self-purification, for only through that can you make contact with your own divine spark. Otherwise, it is blurred and unreliable. You can easily be confused with unconscious desires that have nothing to do with the divine in the human being. Yet contact with the divine world is not the way for all human beings. Other ways may be better suited for some people. It depends on the personality and its stage of development, but the only reason for life on earth is purification and self-finding. And there are many ways that can help you in that. If you have the grace and the privilege to communicate with God's world, this method should be best suited to help you, because it would naturally be a little faster and more direct in showing you how to proceed on your path to find yourself. But it is not the only way. So, is that making sense? I think the question must have been something around, like being a medium and having direct guidance, right? Which the guide basically encourages us all to open our own channels, right? But again, learning all of these things and purification work that we're doing and the healing work that we're doing, there's many different ways. Even 12-step programs, right? Are a part of that kind of purification and healing work. So, and then he goes into some questions about the Virgin Mary. So this is an interesting thing. Are we still good to go? So what is the role of the Virgin Mary from the spiritual point of view? The spirit of the woman you call the Virgin Mary is a very highly developed spirit, a spirit who has never belonged to the fall. Jesus Christ could not have been born out of an impure spirit, and the purity of this spirit led to the misunderstanding of the meaning of the Immaculate Conception, which refers to her unfallen nature. I often say that each error in various religions has some, background that makes the error understandable. Through spirit communication, humanity was told that Jesus' mother was a pure spirit, which could not have been otherwise. And from this communication arose the misunderstanding that purity means sexual purity, and that the mother of Jesus gave birth as a virgin in the physical sense. That is the whole misunderstanding. Many people on earth misdirect their sexual forces and therefore think that sexuality as such is impure. This is not so. The mother of Jesus was and is a pure spirit, but the conception took place like any other conception. God's laws are perfect, regardless of whether humanity perverts some aspects of them or not. So there would be no need for God to override his laws. You see, my friends, as usual, the truth lies in the middle. Some, out of the mistaken idea that everything sexual is impure, say that the mother of Jesus Christ had to be a virgin, and that denying this is sacrilege. Others go to the opposite extreme and deny not only the purity of the spirit of Jesus Christ's mother, but also that Christ was the inborn Son of God, merely because they cannot accept certain erroneous assertions, and they cannot find the truth between these extremes. So question, if you break a divine law in good faith, or if you break it knowingly, are the consequences the same in both cases? No, of course not. When you break it in good faith, the evaluation is very different from when you know what you are doing. Something in you says, the more I know, now let me go ahead. But my dear friends, I would like to say this, since all knowledge is contained within you, something of that truth gets through. And that is why so many of you resist going on this path. Something in you says, the more I know, the more responsible I am for changing myself. If I guard against knowing myself, I may stay as I am, which is more comfortable. This accounts for much resistance. The motive for resistance lack of self-honesty, unconscious or half-conscious as it may be, will be taken into account. For many, the real reason would be quite obvious if they would but examine their resistances. My dearest friends, receive the blessings of love and strength that permeate your heart, your soul, and your whole being at this moment. Know that you are in God and God is in you. You need but lift your hands to him who awaits for you to take the first step out of spiritual childhood toward becoming a strong and independent child of God, growing in spirit, strength, and love. Love one another, my dear ones. Understand one another. Remove the walls of your fear of one another, for they stand without reason. You who fear the other, remember that the other is just as afraid of you. Remember this when you want to settle differences, and God will be with you. So proceed on this path. Consider that each step forward may at times bring you temporarily into a crisis, a difficulty that is but the product of your own errors. View it that way, and you will be victorious. And so, my dear ones, be blessed, all of you, in the name of God, in the name of Jesus Christ. Be in peace, be in the Lord. So this is a very beautiful closing.
Yeah,
Any final? Go ahead, Janice. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say it's a really nice lecture. I have to read it again. Some of the jargon I don't understand, I think.
Yeah.
Probably
I
I
mean,
think it's cultural differences, I think, but yeah.
it can be that. It also, I mean, for me, some of it is, and this is part of, like, I have read many of these lectures time and time and again, and I get new understanding out of it each time, right? So part of it is just, I think the guide was intentionally using different words to kind of help guide us into an understanding, a comprehension, a grokking almost of, what he's talking about. And he kind of approaches it from all of these different ways. And so the more, you can read them the same one over again, or you can read many and begin to get the whole cultural perspective of it, right? But yeah, it's not unusual to, and I used to read one paragraph and I couldn't remember what it said right after I read it, and I have to go back, so there's a lot of, and so, some things you can meditate with and sit with and get clarity, and some things, you just have to let go and say, well, maybe I'll make sense of that later more fully. So
yeah, I also believe that sometimes just clicks differently when you have more awareness. Yeah, I agree with that.
Exactly.
Jasmine, what culture did you grow up in?
So I was born in India. I was born in Punjab, North India. So I guess I belong to the Sikh religion.
Okay.
But I'm trying to learn more about that as well. But I find that, like, when I read Pathworks, when I also listen to some of the old Indian philosophy, at the core of it is sort of the message is very same, right? So I listen to Pathworks because I think the language makes sense to me, whereas in the older scriptures, I don't really understand the language.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And interesting here, like, did I not finish the lecture? Or what? Yeah, there's the Virgin Mary. I can't find that whole part that was in orange that I just read anymore.
The closing?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's all that yellow stuff, the last 3 yellow paragraphs. My dearest friends.
And are you seeing it on the screen right now?
Yeah. My dearest friends, receive the blessing of love and strength that permeate.
And it's yellow for you because somehow I guess I lost the highlight on my copy.
Yeah, there it is. You're highlighting it now.
Okay. So, but somehow it was highlighted before, and I guess it lifted. So, okay. So yeah, good. Sorry. Guess we can take that off the recording. Okay, everybody. Thank you. Good discussion. Anything else?
No, that's it.
That's it.
Have a good evening.
Okay. See you guys later. Bye.
Bye.